Every time you react, you hand someone a blueprint of exactly how to control you. And the worst part, you built it for them. How your reactions become someone else's roadmap. There is a pattern operating in almost every social interaction you have ever been part of. And the reason most people never see it is because they are too busy being inside it. Someone says something, you react. And the moment you do, you have transmitted something that no amount of money can buy and no amount of clever conversation can extract. A map of your interior, your pressure points, your limits, the exact coordinates of where you break. Here is what that means in practice. Every time you respond predictably to a specific kind of pressure, you are not just reacting to that moment. You are training the people around you. You are teaching them, through repetition, that a certain input produces a certain output from you. And once that lesson is learned, it does not require conscious thought to be applied. It becomes automatic, on their side, not just yours. Think about someone in your life who seems to always know which words will land hardest, who seems to read the room around you better than you read it yourself. That is not intuition. That is a database built from watching you over time. Every unguarded reaction you had in their presence was a data point. They collected them without realizing it, and now they navigate by them without trying. The Stoic philosophers did not talk about emotional control because they were indifferent to human experience. They talked about it because they understood something that most modern conversations about feelings deliberately avoid. The person who cannot govern their own response does not actually govern themselves. Someone or something else does. The circumstances do. The provocations do. The moods of other people do. And that is not a personality trait. That is a structural vulnerability. Most people spend their lives optimizing the wrong variable. They try to control the people and situations that trigger them. But the trigger is not the problem. The automatic response to the trigger is the problem. And unlike the external world, that response is actually within reach. If any of this is already making sense in your own experience, stay with it. Because the mechanism behind it goes deeper than it looks. Why? Showing your emotions in public is never free. Now here is the part that almost every conversation about emotional intelligence carefully steps around. Not because it is complicated, because it is uncomfortable in a very specific way. When your emotional state becomes visible, it stops being yours. It enters the shared space of the interaction. And in any shared space, information that is available gets used. Not always with malice. Not always with awareness, but it gets used. Consider what actually happens when you display a strong emotional reaction in a high-stakes environment. A workplace disagreement, a negotiation, a conversation where something important is on the line. You may feel like you are being authentic, honest, transparent, and in one sense, you are. But in the same moment, you are also broadcasting your hierarchy of concerns. What you fear losing, what you need validated, what you cannot let go of without a fight. That broadcast is a gift to whoever is paying attention. There is a documented pattern in behavioral psychology around how people unconsciously calibrate their approach to others based on emotional feedback. When someone reacts strongly to a particular kind of pressure, that reaction signals where the pressure works. It is not a theory. It is the basic operating system of social learning, and it runs continuously, in every environment, whether or not anyone in the room would describe what they are doing as strategic. Here is the inversion that most people never consider. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to reveal less while the situation is still being determined. A military strategist does not broadcast his position before the engagement. He gathers information while limiting what he transmits. That same logic, applied to the psychological landscape of everyday interaction, not coldness. It is precision, and precision, unlike volume or intensity, compounds over time. Have you ever had a moment where you reacted to something and realized afterward that the reaction gave away for more than the situation called for? A moment where you saw, clearly and too late, that someone had been waiting for exactly that response. If that has happened to you, drop it in the comments below, because that recognition, that specific moment of seeing you were read before you spoke, is where this actually starts to change. Why the most powerful response is the one you do not give. Here is the paradox that almost no one resolves. Silence looks like weakness. It looks like you have nothing to say, no position to defend, no argument ready. In a culture that equates speed of response with confidence and volume with authority, staying quiet in a charged moment reads as surrender, as absence, as losing. And yet, look carefully at the people you have actually respected in high-pressure situations. Not the ones who talked the most, not the ones who fired back the fastest, the ones who had weight, the ones whose words, when they finally came, landed with the density that the noise around them never achieved. Almost universally, those people were quiet when everyone else was reacting. That is not a coincidence. When you respond immediately to emotional pressure, you are operating inside the frame that the pressure created. You are playing on a field that someone else set up, by rules that the situation, not you, define. Every word you produce in that reactive state is shaped by the stimulus, not by your actual position. When you pause, even for a few seconds, something shifts. You step outside the frame, and the person who set the pressure in motion suddenly faces something they did not account for: uncertainty. They do not know what you are thinking. They do not know what is coming. And uncertainty in any interpersonal dynamic belongs to whoever created it. This is not passivity. This is the opposite of passivity. Passivity is having no response because you have no position. Strategic silence is having a response and choosing when and whether to deploy it. The distinction between those two things is the difference between being invisible and being unreadable. And unreadable, in any environment that runs on social information, is a position of structural advantage. The people who understand this do not announce it. They do not explain their silence. They do not justify their restraint. They simply stop feeding the mechanism that requires their reaction to function. If this channel is giving you something real, the like helps this kind of content reach people who are actually ready for it. That signal matters more than most people realize. Why? Changing your pattern changes everything around you without a single conversation. This is the part that sounds like an overstatement, until you experience it directly. When you consistently stop providing the emotional response that your environment has been calibrated to expect from you, the environment reorganizes. Not dramatically, not overnight, but it reorganizes. The people around you who have been navigating by your reactions suddenly find that their map is unreliable. The inputs that used to produce predictable outputs no longer do. And without that feedback, without the confirmation that the pressure is landing where it was aimed, the behavior that created the pressure loses its function. They do not necessarily understand why they are adjusting. They just adjust. This is one of the most underestimated laws of human behavior. People do not respond to your intentions. They respond to your pattern. Announce your change, and you invite resistance. Change your pattern silently, without explanation or declaration, and the resistance has no target. It dissolves before it forms. Now here is the part that the standard narrative about emotional control consistently gets wrong. This is not about suppression. Suppression is pushing the reaction inward, keeping the same internal intensity while forcing a neutral exterior. That is a short-term strategy with long-term consequences, and those consequences tend to arrive without warning at the worst possible moment. What this is actually about is the gap, the interval between stimulus and response, a space that, at first, may only be a fraction of a second, but with practice and with the right internal question asked in that space, that fraction becomes enough. The question is not, how do I feel about this? That question keeps you inside the reaction. The question is, what does my response right now say about where I stand? That question moves you into authorship, into choice, into a position where the situation no longer writes the script and hands it to you. The difference between someone who is moved by circumstances and someone who moves through circumstances is rarely intelligence or resources or talent. Almost always, it comes down to that gap, that interval, and what happens in it. Why? Once you see this, you cannot go back to playing it blind. There is a threshold in this process. It does not announce itself. One moment, you are in a situation that would have pulled a full reaction out of you 6 months ago, and you notice that something different is happening. You are still inside it. You feel the pressure. You recognize the mechanism, but there is a layer of observation running underneath the experience that was not there before. You are watching the dynamic unfold in real time rather than being carried by it. That is not detachment. That is not indifference. That is a different relationship with your own interior. And it changes everything downstream. Because once you stop reacting automatically, once you begin operating from that gap, your perception of the interactions around you shifts in a way that is difficult to describe and impossible to unfeel. You start seeing what was always there but invisible when you were inside the reaction. Who is being driven by fear of judgment? Who is projecting pressure they are carrying from somewhere else entirely? Who is reading the room and calibrating accordingly? The social architecture of any environment becomes legible in a way it never was when your own reaction was the loudest signal in the room. This is not cynicism. This is clarity. And clarity, applied without announcement, is one of the quietest and most consequential advantages that exists in any environment built on human interaction. What remains after that threshold is a question worth sitting with. Not as anxiety, as honest investigation. If every unguarded reaction you have produced is information you handed to the people around you, what have you transmitted in the last 30 days? What would have shifted if you had chosen the gap instead of the reflex? If this video changed something in how you are going to move through your next high-pressure moment, subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next goes one level deeper into this framework, and you will want to be here when it does. And tell me below, what is the situation in your life right now where your reaction is costing you more than the situation itself is worth? Starting today, apply the 4-second rule to every situation that pulls for an immediate reaction. Not to suppress what you feel, to choose what you transmit. In those 4 seconds, ask one question: does my response right now serve my position, or does it serve theirs? 4 seconds is enough to separate the reflex from the choice. And in that separation, repeated consistently, the entire dynamic of how people interact with you begins to shift. Not because you announced a change, because you became someone whose next move they can no longer predict. The content on this channel is philosophical, occasional, and observational in nature. Perspectives presented are based on behavioral patterns and philosophical interpretation, not clinical or certified psychological claims.